Church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's an honor to be with you again this week. We continue back in Isaiah this week, finishing up chapter 13. Destruction of Babylon is what we're talking about this week. We had last week was Resurrection Sunday message. Hope you enjoyed that. But we are back in Isaiah today, talking about the destruction of Babylon. We seem to be talking about the destruction of one country or another a lot these days, but it's all there. We're here again for a reason. God has us in the book of Isaiah for a reason, and I'm not going to question that. So we are to learn from history rather than ignore it, and I think that's why we're here. So Isaiah today, in talking about Babylon and using, again, Babylon specifically and as a metaphor for any nation that thinks, of itself more highly than it should. Isaiah shows us today the difference between the temporary and ultimate results of pride. Babylon in the 700 BCs, they were the pearl of civilization. They were the center for culture and commerce, more so than even Assyria was. And they were starting to exert their force politically on the world. She was an example of what mankind could accomplish should he decide to put his mind to it. And so it was a shining example of an overarching world power. But Isaiah shows us how futile man's greatest achievements can be when you compare them to God's glory. In 689, Sennacherib puts down a Babylonian rebellion. And with the violence that we talked about in the verses prior to this a couple of weeks ago, Cyrus and Darius would take over Babylon in a much less forceful way, a much quieter way, a much more peaceful takeover in 539 BC. And in both of those cases, while Babylon was put down, it wasn't fully abandoned until later. And it comes later with a lot less fanfare than a big war or a big rebellion being crushed, as Sennacherib did. Babylon doesn't just eventually just fade off into the sunset like an old athlete or an old actor who's forgotten about once they turn old. So we find and see that the only glory that is everlasting is the glory given to us by God's grace. It's a gift from God. So we begin in chapter 13, verse 19. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. Sodom and Gomorrah were the paradigm here for Isaiah. If you wanted an example of what a sinful culture, a sinful nation was, everybody would point to that and point to the disaster that came when God brought his judgment upon them, rightfully so. So Sodom and Gomorrah are the example. They're the paradigm. They're the bar, so to speak, of what not to do from a sinful perspective. Sodom and Gomorrah took great pride in their sophistication, much like the cultures of today's world. And just like Sodom and Gomorrah and Babylon, these cultures of today will be crushed. They pale in comparison to God's glory. And they will suffer that same type of destruction, especially in the days of the book of Revelation. We think of ourselves beyond God. We think of ourselves as a nation, at least speaking for the United States, of a people that can go about its business and do whatever they think is right in their own eyes and in their own minds, rather than what God says in his Bible. Colorado here, we've got a lot of crazy stuff going on from a political perspective. The most latest thing is this dead naming law, HB 25-1312, the legal protections of transgender individuals is what it's called. Fancy name for an overstepping of the state. Basically what it says is that let me read section 2, right? And then we'll explain it. And I use this as an example of what the nations of the world think of themselves and compared to what God says we are and how we should act. Section 2 of this law says that, Section 2 provides that when making child custody decisions and determining the best interests of a child for purposes of parenting time, a court shall consider dead naming. Now, if you don't know what dead naming is using a child's given name at birth when they have decided that they are transgender and they've changed their name and they've changed who they think they are from a sex perspective, and you don't acknowledge that, you don't honor that, right? Dead naming is calling them by the name you gave them at birth, okay? So a court shall consider dead naming, misgendering, right? I have a son who now thinks she's my daughter, and I refuse to call him my daughter. That's misgendering. Or threatening to publish material related to an individual's gender-affirming healthcare services as types of coercive control. Okay? When making child custody decisions and determining the best interests of a child for purposes of parenting time, right? How much time a parent gets to spend with their child, a court shall consider dead naming, misgendering, or threatening to publish material related to an individual's gender-affirming healthcare services as types of coercive control. A court shall consider reports of coercive control when determining the allocation of parental responsibilities in accordance with the best interests of the child. Basically, the state can come in and assert itself in how you raise your child, can remove that child from your custody for those purposes. So if you're raising your child in a Christian home, let's say, and you refuse to acknowledge the transgender ideology and the LGBTQ stuff that the world says now you have to accept, the state can come in, consider that when it comes to how you parent your child. Do you get to parent your child? And they can remove your child from your custody for the welfare, what they consider the welfare of the child. Right? And I'm condensing that into a Reader's Digest form. But that's where we are. That's who we think we are. Right? Like Sodom and Gomorrah, Babylon, we think ourselves above God, above God's laws, and above God's rules, and above God's precepts. It's who we are now. The Bible tells us the fate we're going to suffer. Move on to verse 20. It will never be inhabited, speaking of Babylon, or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. Babylon will be abandoned. Nobody will live there. No one will inhabit Babylon. Bedouins at various times have pitched their tents there. But overall, Babylon will be much like Sodom and Gomorrah. Never to be reestablished, rebuilt, re-inhabited. See, humanity can't sustain itself by itself. We think we can. No matter how hard mankind tries, we cannot produce more and more and more and more and fill up the world, right? Until it fills zero. It doesn't work that way. And we've seen that throughout history. Wars, famines, pestilence insert themselves from time to time, and we find out we're only immortal for limited time. You've heard me use that line before. It's a Rush line from one of their songs. We found out very quickly how either we are self-destructive or the natural evolution of things, viruses and those types of things come in, and we have no control over those, no matter how hard we try. So mankind is insufficient to sustain itself on its own. And it's only by God's mercy that we haven't destroyed ourselves already. But as we continue on, we keep moving more and more towards that one world government spoken of in the book of Revelations. And the destruction of man's machinations spoken of pertaining to Babylon is becoming more and more evident in the world today. We think that we are all powerful. We think that we can do whatever we want. We think that we can now do things in the name of climate change and have control over creation, right? We're going to dim the sun now. The UK is going to dim the sun now in order to try to stave off climate change. Now, even though all those predictions since the 60s when I was growing up, when we were entering into a new ice age, supposedly, all those predictions that Al Gore made and all the predictions that all these people have made over the years about the rising oceans and all that kind of stuff, none of it's happened. None of it has come to fruition. None of it. But yet, the UK is now going to dim the sun. Have a look at this. If you don't believe me, have a look at this.
Can you think of anything more mad scientist than literally trying to block sunlight from reaching the Earth? Well, they're actually doing it. The UK government has approved outdoor field trials which could include injecting aerosols into the atmosphere or brightening clouds to reflect sunshine as a way to prevent runaway climate change, at a cost to the taxpayer of 50 million quid. You see that thing up there that's the primary life source for our entire planet? The thing that powers photosynthesis in plants? The thing that forms the basis of most food chains, provides oxygen and fuels the water cycle. Yeah, that thing. We're just going to block it out. What could possibly go wrong? We're just going to mess about with the very thing that makes it possible for life to exist on Earth. Okay, no worries, go right ahead. Are you fucking insane or what? We have rulers who are pathologically terrified of the sun's light and radiance, like orcs, vampires and other unholy entities. Like we don't get enough dull, grey, cloudy weather in the UK already. They're trying to make us even more miserable. Any project of this kind on a larger scale, which is obviously what they ultimately intend to do, could potentially devastate farms and fisheries. It could be catastrophic for many species unable to adapt. And it's likely to unleash a multitude of other harmful consequences that we wouldn't even be able to anticipate. In America, the Trump administration and RFK Jr. have been desperately trying to block geoengineering for these very reasons. This after details of a secretive project last year conducted from the deck of an aircraft carrier in the San Francisco Bay to shoot trillions of aerosol particles into the sky to increase cloud cover were withheld from the public. One expert said blocking out the sun would use a process similar to how aircraft contrails cause accidental cirrus cloud modification. Oh, you mean chemtrails? Ooh, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
So that's where we are now. We're going to take matters into our own hands. The sun that we need to survive, the sun that we need to grow things, to grow food, and to help provide for ourselves, we're going to try to, see if we can control it, see if we can, it's just ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. We can see what happens. Watch what happens now and the catastrophe that this brings, if it's at all successful. We have proven time and time again that we cannot get out of our own way when it comes to messing with God's creation and trying to exert power over it and trying to control it. So just watch. We'll talk about it, right, down the line. If this thing is any bit successful at all, and there's evidence supposedly that it's already been going on for like the last year or so, watch what happens. And watch the catastrophe it does to the food chain, right? And all those types of things that we need to survive. So watch what happens. Verses 21, 22. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. Right? Animals are all that's left to hang out here, and animals that hang out in the dark and lonely and dank places. The city is silent except for the cries of owls and creatures of the night, kind of thing. The luxurious palaces, the mightiest impenetrable strongholds, and the most luxurious houses will now be home to jackals and hyenas and ostriches and God knows what other animals. And it'll be left to the animals that feast on the dead carcasses of those that are left behind by those mightier than they. Right? Hyenas, you've all seen Lion King, I assume, right? Hyenas are the ones that come and feast on the kill of other animals. That's what's going to be left here, right? The mighty have fallen. And again, the example for us is, as I've talked about today, and I know some people it's going to drive you crazy because we went into politics and stuff, but you have to discuss all of these things because it all matters. It all falls into what God has been talking about for centuries. And so as the mighty have fallen in the past, the mighty will fall again in the future, either by their own hands or by the fact that they continue to ignore God, continue to refuse to give God the glory, to recognize him as Almighty God. You take your future into your own hands when you do that. So the destruction of Babylon is going to come for the lands of today, who hold themselves in higher esteem than they should, as Babylon once did. So before I go this week, a couple of things to note. We have removed, I'm sure you've seen, we've removed the Song of the Week and the book club from the app and from the website. In fact, I don't know if we did it from the website yet, but those things have gone away. Nobody's listening to them as they are to the broadcasts, the sermons, and the devotions and the messages. So I'm here to give you what is going to work and what's going to feed you, right? Feed your soul, strengthen your faith is our tagline. And so that's what we're here for. And so if those things aren't helping, and if nobody's listening to them and has an interest in them, then we're not going to do them. So we've taken those things down. And lastly, and you'll see an announcement of this. There's already an ad running on the radio station, but we are doing a day of fasting and prayer again on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, April 29th, in conjunction with Craig James and Just Informed Talk Radio. Fasting and praying against not just the evil that's going on in the world, but for God's love. As I talked about last week, God's love is the thing that moves God to do what God does, right? His love, everything he does stems from his love for us. And so there's a lot of division, there's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of all kind of stuff going on from a position of anger and bitterness and hatred and people being upset with things. And we need the love of God to fill us. The only way we're going to bridge these gaps and close these divides and overcome this divisiveness that is on the land is to allow God to impart his love in us for one another. And so we'll be praying for that and fasting for that as well this Tuesday. So I hope you'll join us. I'll be on the radio for an interview, 8 a.m. Colorado time on 1360 KHNC here in Colorado. You can, if you're here and you can get it on AM, great. If not, you can get it online at 1360khnc.com, and you can listen to it online if you'd like, and I'll be posting it then later that day as well, so you can hear it if you don't have time to listen in the morning. But again, that's April 29th, a day of prayer and fasting against evil, against wickedness, but more importantly, for God's love to fill us. So, hope you have a great week. I hope you'll join us on Tuesday, and thanks for being here. I'm glad you're here today. I'm glad that you listen to the devotions and the daily scriptures and the prayers and the broadcasts. Those old broadcasts from Pastor Doug and myself that we've been rerunning seem to be resonating with a lot of people. The Holy Spirit was really speaking through us then. All glory to God for that. And so it's important, and I think good to revisit those. So I hope you have a great week. Thanks for being here. I love you guys. And keep your prayers coming. And Lord willing, we'll talk again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.